everyone, welcome back to another Physics 204-208 lecture. Today we're going to go into more details about noise, which I've been bringing up in past lectures. Since we've been talking about noise since working on filters, trying to remove noise, we've been talking a lot about white noise and using that in the different labs, but now we'll go into different colors, different sources of noise we talked about last week. Now, how can we identify those sources of noise? So those are going to be some of our goals for this lecture. So we'll be going over, can you identify what color of noise different sources of noise are? So by color, I mean, what is its power spectrum? How does that vary versus the bandwidth of frequencies that you're looking at? Related to this and looking at the different colors of noise, we'll be going over white, pink, red, and blue noise. You should also be able to draw your own noise spectrum plots. So again, this is making these type of plots of the power spectrum of the noise versus frequency. And you should be able to do this in terms of the color of the noise or the source of the noise. So I'll put a little star next to this one because this will be important both in, as you guys have been working in Lab 4, but also in Quiz 4 as well. This will be an important point. Last lecture we talked about the different sources of noise, where we were talking about thermal, shot, flicker, environmental noise. But how can you determine and prevent different sources of noise? So determining it and preventing it. Finally, in relation to noise, I mean, this is also going to be, I'll star this guy as well because this will also be important. Finally, how do you characterize how well your instrument is working in terms of the noise that you're able to overcome and get adequate signal? And this is called the dynamic range of your instrument. So we'll be going over that. And then finally, today I'll give a brief introduction to the lock-in amplifier. And this is going to be the focus of Lab 5 completely, and we'll have an entire lecture devoted to that next, but I just want to introduce you to the concept as well. So let's get into things. Let's first talk about the color of noise, since we've been talking all about white noise. What I mean by color, man, this pen is not wanting to reply. So color, that's going to be our power spectrum of the noise. If you remember, this is the notation that we use for the power spectrum. And we've been working pretty extensively with white noise. And where if we write this out again, it's going to be a uniform power density as a function of frequency. And if you remember that we defined that this is called white because it's an analogy to light. So white light has all colors of light, or all frequencies of light, equally represented. So we can say that white light has all frequencies or all wavelengths of light, where our frequency is inversely proportional to that wavelength there. So you guys have been working on the white noise pretty extensively so far, so you're familiar with that. The next noise that I want to define is pink noise. You know, taking advantage of the different pens that I can use on my tablet here. So this is once we get into these different colors that are not white, it is not uniform overall frequencies. And with all the colors, they'll have a different dependence here. So pink noise, we have lower frequencies contribute more. So trying to remember this, the fact that we have lower here and pink, you can again think of light and the electromagnetic spectrum. The lower energies, the lower frequency light is going to be more in the redder portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So pink is a shade of red, and we use pink noise to quantitatively describe a dependence of 1 over the frequency. So this will decrease 3 decibels per octave. So getting into our power spectrum of our noise, what this means is related to energy. So we can say that each octave has the same amount of energy. So just be aware that if you look at 40 to 60 hertz, that's going to have the same amount of energy as 4,000 to 6,000 hertz. So that's what we're defining as an octave here. So the important thing to remember is that pink noise has a dependence of 1 over F. So we can also describe red noise, which has a power density that is proportional to 1 over F squared. So this is sometimes also referred to as brown noise as well. And it's referred to as brown noise because you'll see this 1 over F squared be related to Brownian motion. So when we're discussing pink noise and red noise, that is all the difference between those two is when we're being very specific about in a quantitative way, where pink noise is the 1 over F, while the red noise is 1 over F squared. But we can also just say in a qualitative fashion that red noise is going to be anything where you have higher contributions at lower frequencies. So qualitatively, this would be where the power spectrum is proportional to 1 over F in some dependence. So trying to remember the difference between pink noise and red noise, realize that red, I guess, is more extreme. Pink is a mixture of red and white. So that's one way that you can keep it straight in your head. The difference between those two very similar noises. Finally, the last noise I want to talk about is blue noise. And just like with the Just like with the analogy to the electromagnetic spectrum, blue is the opposite end of the EM spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, as red. It has to do with the higher frequency components. So if you imagine that the pink noise is 1 over F, this one has a power, sorry about that, power density spectrum proportional to F. So that's the important thing here. It's linear. That we have higher frequency components contribute more. So again, qualitatively, you can describe red or blue noise based on if it's lower frequency or higher frequency components contributing more. But quantitatively, in our course here, we'll talk about blue being proportional to S, red being proportional to 1 over F squared, pink being 1 over F, and white being uniform for all frequencies. There's also other colors of noise. You may hear of gray noise, violet, which would be F squared, since it's at the blue end of the spectrum, black noise, etc., etc. But these are not as relevant to electronics. So we won't be talking about them in this class, but you may hear of them if you're working with noise and audio or the like. In the lecture notes I've uploaded, I've included a link to a YouTube video where you can listen to the differences between these noises. That as much as maybe you use a white noise machine to help you sleep if you're listening to Rainy Mood online or something like that when you're studying or trying to sleep, actually a lot of white noise machines might actually be pink noise. If you hear rain outside, that will be a pink noise instead. So with all these different colors, this is just a written description, but let's also, with these quantitative descriptions, we can plot the noise spectrum. Let me just draw a little line down here so I can scroll down. So we can plot a noise spectrum both in terms of color and the different sources of noise that we have. First, based on color, let's make our axes here. We're going to list this as the power spectrum on the y-axis in terms of decibels. So that would be a log scale. And then on our x-axis, we're going to have a log scale of our frequency in terms of hertz. So the easiest one that we can plot right now, you guys have made plots of this, you've extracted it already in lab, is white noise, where you expect over time or over averaging to have a flat line in terms of all frequencies here. This would be equivalent to the frequency raised to the 0 power would be a flat line here. And let's go to our pink noise. We would have a linear dependence with the log of the frequency. We'd expect to see something like this. Red, where we have, so this is 1 over F. Red noise is just more drastic, a steeper slope here. And actually, this would continue down. I'm cutting it off here. This would be 1 over F squared. This would be red. And then finally, with our blue noise, we'd actually see an increase as we increase the frequency over here with the same slope as the pink noise. This would be proportional to F. So that's based on color, but how about we do this based on source? As a quick refresher here, last week we discussed thermal noise, which you remember what color that we described that as. That was a white source of noise. If you remember that the VRMS was proportional to the square root of the bandwidth. So the fact that this is true for all bands of frequency makes it a white noise source. We also talked about shot noise, which again, if you remember, was a white noise source, where our current RMS is again proportional to square root of B. We talked about flicker noise. This is the one that was different. You call flicker noise also 1 over F noise, which should clearly show you, just that description should tell you what color noise that is. 1 over F, if we go back up here, looking above, 1 over F is a pink noise source. And then finally we had environmental. This has no frequency dependence. So we have no color associated with it. So we can make a similar plot here based on the source. Let's draw all these sources of noise independently, and then let's draw our total noise spectrum. So we can have our log of our frequency here again in terms of hertz. We can also have our power spectrum here in decibels. And let's try to be a little bit quantitative about this. That we can say first, let's look at based on our source. The easiest things to draw first would be our white sources of noise. So we could say, okay, we'll have some contributions from thermal noise. We can also say we have some contributions from the shot noise. I'm going to draw all these individually and then let's sum them together. We can also say, let's draw this line as 100 hertz here. Because if you remember from our last lecture, flicker noise is only significant, let me get this pink pen, only significant below 100 hertz. So that's at that low frequencies, you'll start to see that 1 over F behavior. But then at higher frequencies, let's actually draw this down here. That this 1 over F dependence becomes so small after 100 hertz at those higher frequencies, it's no longer a significant contributor. So let's call this our flicker noise as well. Then finally, for our environmental noise, we know that there's a significant low frequency contribution at 60 hertz from our power lines and the like. I mean, we can even have something even lower frequency. Let's say like there's a class change from vibrations. Who knows? That's some sources. Then even at higher frequencies, if we go up to kilohertz range and megahertz range, we can remember that we have AM frequencies in the kilohertz, some random spikes, the megahertz. Let's say this big one here is 91.1 FM, since it's so close by with WRUW, that you'll have some radio signals. So these will be your AM signals, these will be your FM signals. So this is just showing all of these are, let me label this as environmental. So these are all of our sources of noise drawn out independently. Let's draw the total here. Log of F, hertz, our power spectrum. That If we sum these all together, I guess I drew this on a quite high scale, but let's sum them together. So those are some of our environmental noises. And our white noise offset. Let's see here. Our AM environmental noise. Our FM environmental noise. So this is trying to keep these scales on the y-axis here the same, but obviously if I change my scales here, it would be shifted down. But we can clearly see with our noise spectrum plot, and this is what you should have observed at the end of Lab 4 when you were changing your different scales and looking at the Fourier transform of your noise, that if you change your scales where you were below 100 hertz, you should have seen the flicker noise becoming apparent and that 60 hertz peak being pretty apparent. You see this white noise offset, and then in terms of more the kilohertz and the megahertz regions, you should have seen some environmental spikes there. But this would be our total noise spectrum. So realize that we've drawn two different types of noise spectrum here based on the source, and then up above based on the color. So later on, if I ask you guys to plot a noise spectrum based on either of these two things, be aware that there's these different plots. And here with this total noise spectrum plot, you can identify, okay, this is pretty constant overall frequencies. There's some white noise source, some pink noise, some environmental noise based on those different things. So with these different sources of noise that we've talked over, the thermal, shot, flicker, environmental, if you have a noise spectrum, a question you can have is, how can you distinguish them? How can you prevent them? And the best way to get an idea of how you can distinguish and prevent these is, again, considering this noise spectrum and also reminding ourselves of the different equations that we talked about in last lecture. That looking at the equations of the different noise sources, let's start out with thermal noise here. If you guys remember, it was VRMS is equal to the square root 4 times the Boltzmann constant times the temperature times the resistivity and the bandwidth, square root of all of that. So if we take a look at this equation here, if we want to determine is the source of noise in our circuit, in our instrument, is the problem mainly the thermal noise source? Let's take a look at this equation. What can we change here? Well, 4 and KB are constants, so they're kind of out. But going through here, we can say we can change the temperature with T. So increased temperature, do you see an increase in noise? That will help you determine if thermal noise is the source. What you guys did in Lab 4, Part 5, is you varied the source resistance. So do you see the RMS of the noise scale with the square root of R? Does it scale with the equation? And then finally, sure, bandwidth is listed there, but it's not really a good option here. So this is difficult to do. I mean, you can look at different bands, but there's not a lot of difference between other white noise sources. If you remember, if we move on to shot noise, it also has this bandwidth dependence. But before moving on to the shot noise, I'd like to go in a little bit more detail with the thermal noise. That what we've been doing in lab, thermal noise isn't a significant problem, but it does become a significant problem with low signal experiments. So if you're dealing with like nanovolts. So this is why in some of the research labs here, like Professor Rule's lab or Professor Gao's lab, use cryogenic temperatures to reduce this. So you can decrease that temperature. People also decrease the impedance. Or they'll decrease the bandwidth. This is how you prevent thermal noise. So this is why people use like liquid helium or nitrogen to decrease that temperature quite a bit. So this is the prevention. Varying the temperature and varying the resistance is how you distinguish. So that's for thermal noise. So let's move on to shot noise, where we had IRMS is equal to the square root of 2 fundamental charge of the electron, your average DC current, and your bandwidth here. So again, 2 and E are constants. There's no way to change those. If you're trying to distinguish shot noise, this leaves just your current. So if you increase or decrease your signal strength, do you see a square root behavior? This is really the key way to distinguish shot noise here. If you're decreasing or increasing the amount of electrons going through, do you see that probabilistic dependence or change in the noise due to the quantum nature of those electrons? Similarly, if you, to the thermal noise, changing the bandwidth isn't that great because it's similar to any other white noise. So if you want to distinguish shot noise, change your signal strength. If you want to prevent or reduce, I guess with all of these experiments, you can't entirely prevent these noise sources. Really there's not many options for shot noise to try to prevent or reduce it. You can try to decrease your average signal strength, but that's not always an option. If you're at picoamps to femtoamps, that's when shot noise is very significant. And you can see this show up with the KDMM. It has a 100 nanoamp resolution. So the best way to prevent or reduce the effects of shot noise is actually using our software approaches. Because this is a white noise approach, the best way is to do ensemble averaging, because it does have that white noise effect. So the more electrons you collect it, collect, the less the effect is. Okay, let's move on to, so ensemble averaging is for shot noise. Let's move on to flicker noise. So remember, this is 1 over F. We talked about in the last lecture there's not a clear source of flicker noise, but different electronics have different 1 over F noise, flicker noise dependence. So we do know that carbon resistors, that the flicker noise does have a dependence on the interface of the carbon grains. So if you need to reduce the flicker noise, you can use fancier resistors. So instead of having, let's say, like, this is like a nanoscale view. Like these little squiggles I'm drawing are the different grains within the carbon. You can instead use fancier resistors like a carbon film, where they'll thermally process this carbon, so you'll have, let's say, just in the same amount of area, instead of having a ton of different interfaces, maybe just 1 or 2 carbon film or wire wound resistors. So the noise for carbon resistors would be, let's see, the VRMS would be around 0.1 to 3 microvolts per decade of the frequency. Carbon film, or these wire wound ones, will be an order of magnitude less, 0.01 to 0.3 microvolts per decade. So you can reduce this noise by using fancier resistors, but the problem is they're a lot more money. So that's why, at least in Phys 204, 208, we're using our not as fancy carbon resistors. But if you are trying to construct a more sensitive instrument working at very low frequencies, it might be worth your time in research to buy these nicer resistors. Another way to overcome flicker noise is to modulate your signal. So one way to prevent flicker noise is to reduce flicker noise is use fancier resistors. Another way is to modulate signal. And this would be a way to work at higher frequencies. If you chop it up. So those are some options to overcome flicker noise. Then, finally, environmental noise. We talked about a lot of electronic sources here. The 60 hertz noise from power lines, radio signals. Since these are at very specific frequencies, that's the way you distinguish them as peaks, like we've been saying, if there's no color. But the most common way to overcome environmental noise is shielding. So if it's possible, can you surround critical components of your circuit with a conducting material connected to ground? So this may be easy for, let's say, your wallboard if you build a metal box around it, connect it to ground. But think of small instrumentation or equipment that might have to be going up on the International Space Station or into field work. It's not always the easiest to create a shield around your entire instrument. So in design of equipment, design of instrumentation, if you're concerned about environmental noise, this is something that you should take into consideration early on in the design. So with all these different sources of noise we've talked about, these different, I guess this would be a hardware way with the shielding. Modulating the signal can be hardware or software, fancier resistors hardware, ensemble averaging software, decreasing the temperature and impedance. A lot of these ways are with hardware. And then also, of course, you guys are familiar with filters, signal averaging, etc. All of those approaches can be used if you are strategic about your selection to overcome noise. So thinking about that power dependence, which frequency ranges you're interested in. And also what the frequency ranges you're interested in and the desired signal you need. Because we've talked about, sure, it'd be great if you could just put a bandpass filter into your circuit every time, but you can sacrifice your signal there. And a way to characterize what ranges of signals that you can detect, the degree of your sensitivity of your instrumentation to detect different signals, is characterized by something called a dynamic range. So this is the last portion that I want to get into related to the noise. So the dynamic range for an instrument is the ratio in decibels between your max signal you can detect and the minimum signal. So your max signal is going to be related to your instrument limitations. Like how much can you detect before you saturate your detector? And then the minimum detectable signal, and why this is related to noise, is where your signal to noise ratio, where you can still detect that signal. So your dynamic range, which I'm going to abbreviate DR here, is going to be your log base 20 of your signal max and your signal min, the ratio of those. And this is going to be important in Lab 5 as well. And just to give you a brief introduction for Lab 5, that's the end of the noise section here. I just want to briefly mention the lock-in amplifier, since that will be the topic of Lab 5. We'll have an entire lecture devoted to the lock-in amplifier, which we're going to abbreviate LIA. And it's a way to overcome signal that has a very low signal-to-noise ratio. You might even say it's entirely obscured by the noise. But so you can detect signal obscured by noise. You're going to be taking advantage of your signal's periodicity or its frequency dependence versus the random aspect or the different frequency dependence of your noise. So this is able to detect signals that there's no way you would have been able to detect in lab 3 or 4 with your signal to noise ratios. I think most of you guys said you could detect signals with signal to noise ratios of 0.3 on the in the frequency domain. Well, with lock-in amplifiers, it's not 0.3, it's 0.001. So to the thousandth place here. So that means that we can reduce noise levels with a lock-in amplifier by pretty much a factor of 1,000 or 10 to the third. So that's a pretty impressive. And lock-in amplifiers you guys will be using in junior and senior lab as well. They're used in spectroscopy, electronics, lots of different types of equipment. So the way this lock-in amplifier works is it's going to compare your signal to a reference. So you're going to feed in, your signal is going to be Vs, your reference is going to be Vr. So the steps in the lock-in amplifier is that you mix the signal with Vs and Vr, your signal and your reference. And the first step here, in terms of if we describe this mathematically, is you would multiply these signals. So that's the first step here. The second thing is you're going to integrate the multiplied signal. And if you guys remember, from lab 4 what type of filter integrates. So you would do this if you're trying to integrate here. The type of filter you would use, if you recall, would be a low pass filter here. So there's a built-in low pass filter in the lock-in amplifier. And the important thing here is when you're multiplying and then integrating your signal versus a reference, the truth holds that Vs times Vr, and if you take the integral, it will equal 0 only when they're at the same frequency. And we'll get into the math of that next week. So I guess that's the third step. The third step here. And this is how you determine the frequency of your signal. So one way that you could describe a lock-in amplifier is it's a arbitrarily narrow notch filter or bandpass filter. That is very sensitive to that very specific frequency here. So it's very important when you're using a lock-in amplifier in lab is that it has a very low sensitivity down to nanovolts. So you really need to know the settings and your dynamic range, which we just discussed. Based on your settings, what voltages are you able to detect? Because it's very easy to saturate or overload this instrument. So please be careful. I'm drawing this in red and with a lot of arrows to please don't break the lock-in amplifiers. So I'll be uploading the manual for next week for this lab, and providing some YouTube videos of looking at the instrument before you guys get into lab to use this. But I just wanted to give a brief introduction. We're going to go into all the details. But remember that lock-in amplifiers here, the takeaway is they're a way to detect signals with a very low signal-to-noise ratio. The way that you detect these very low signal-to-noise ratio signals is you multiply a signal times a reference. That's the way that you mix those. You multiply them together. That's the first mathematical step. Then you integrate those multiplied signals, and it's only equal to 0 when you have the same frequency. So once those are, the reason it's called locked in is because the signal frequency is locked into the reference frequency. So I hope if we keep scrolling back here, we talked about all of the different ways to distinguish and prevent or reduce the effects of different noise sources. So with all of the noises that we've been talking about, always review thermal noise, shot noise, flicker noise, and environmental noise. And we characterize these different noises in terms of the color, and we could draw a total noise spectrum shown on the right here. And we went over, again, these different colors. And remembering that these colors all come from analogies to the electromagnetic spectrum. So with that, I hope we've gone over noise finally in more details, and we're going to be ready to detect really noisy signals pretty soon with the lock-in amplifier. So that will be the topic of our next lecture in a lot more detail, and the topic of Lab 5. So we'll discuss that next time. Thanks.